Your law degree is worthless. 60 million Americans watched Alito's words hit Jasmine Crockett like a gavel strike, the chamber air snapping with shock. In the next breath, she either breaks or makes history. What came out of her mouth froze the most powerful man in the room. Washington, D.C., just after sunrise. The Capitol steps buzzed like a live wire. TV vans lined the curb, reporters clutching their mics, voices sharp with urgency. Everyone knew today's hearing could shake the Supreme Court. Protesters pressed against metal barricades, waving signs that screamed "Ethics Now" and "Justice for All." Across from them, court loyalists waved flags, their chants clashing in the cold morning air. A row of veterans stood apart, uniforms crisp, medals flashing under the pale light. No words, just a silent, unshakable presence. Then the doors opened. Jasmine Crockett stepped from a black SUV, walking ahead of her aides. Back straight, eyes fixed forward. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. Every camera swung toward her. Zoom lenses clicked like a swarm of locusts. She moved as if the chaos was just background noise. On the steps, a working mother with a stroller called out, "We're with you, Jasmine!" Two young law students scribbled furiously, sensing history was minutes away. Inside, the chamber hummed with anticipation. The kind you feel before a storm breaks. Seats were full. Whispers swirled. All eyes waited for the collision about to unfold. If you had one shot to face the most powerful judge in America, what would you say? The chamber doors swung open again. Samuel Alito stepped in, flanked by two aides in dark suits, his expression carved from ice. The room's hum thinned into silence. Even the reporters lowered their voices. He didn't glance at the crowd. His eyes locked on the witness table, on Jasmine, like a hunter sizing up prey. She didn't look away. Not even a blink. The chairman gavelled the session open. Jasmine leaned toward her mic first, her voice steady but edged with steel. She went straight for the jugular. Questions about undisclosed gifts, conflicts of interest, the trust of the American people. Alito didn't answer so much as dance around them. Legal jargon rolled off his tongue like a smokescreen. He spoke in clauses and precedents, never touching the heart of her question. The camera cut between them. Her gaze sharp as a blade, his mouth curling into a faint, dismissive smirk. He slipped in little digs, calling her misinformed and overly emotional without saying the words outright. She pressed harder, asking if personal favors from wealthy donors influenced his rulings. A ripple of murmurs passed through the gallery. A veteran in the front row leaned forward. One of the law students stopped taking notes, just watching. It was a chess game played in real time, and both knew millions were watching every move. The tension was climbing, breath by breath. Somewhere deep down, everyone in that room felt it. This wasn't going to end with polite smiles. This was the warm-up before the strike. Alito leaned toward his mic, voice dropping into a slow drawl. "Your law degree is worthless." Jasmine's eyebrow arched. Worthless? That's a strange word coming from someone whose oath seems to have a price tag. Gasps broke out across the chamber as the verbal volley began. In the front row, a veteran's pen slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. The camera snapped to Jasmine's face. No flinch, no blink, just stillness, as if the words had frozen the air around her. For a Supreme Court justice to say that, on live television, wasn't just personal, it was cultural. In a country where education is a ladder out of poverty, he just tried to kick it out from under her. The weight of it pressed on every person watching. In the chamber, in living rooms, in diners across America. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others leaned forward, waiting to see if she'd break. But then, the corner of her mouth lifted. A faint, almost dangerous smile. The room didn't know it yet, but the game had just changed. If someone tried to erase your life's work in front of 60 million people, what would you do? The sound of Alito's words still hung in the air, and then, like a pull on a thread, the story slipped backward. Dallas, Texas. A small brick house with peeling paint, fixed by hand because hiring help was never an option. Jasmine grew up here, a public school kid with hand-me-down textbooks who learned early that nothing came easy. Her parents lived discipline, a mother up before dawn packing lunches, a father in work boots reviewing her homework late into the night. Saturdays meant community meetings, where Jasmine learned the power and the sting of voices joined together. By high school, she worked part-time to help her family. Every dollar mattered. Every hour was a choice between rest and progress. Late nights, she studied by the thin light of a desk lamp, the walls around her plastered with index cards of legal terms she barely understood yet. But she knew one thing. Understanding them was her way out. Hope wasn't some airy dream for Jasmine. It was grit under her nails and sweat on her back. And as the flashback faded, we were back in that Senate chamber. The same grit now sitting across from Samuel Alito. The question was, would it be enough to stand up to him now? At law school, the grit had to work harder. Tuition bills loomed, so Jasmine juggled night shifts and classes until exhaustion felt normal. But in the middle of that grind, she found an ally. Professor Harris. Gray hair, sharp eyes, and a voice that carried in every lecture hall. He pulled her aside one afternoon, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "A degree is a weapon when wielded for others. The question is, will you have the courage to use it?" That stuck. It followed her into cramped apartments where she drafted legal briefs on a secondhand laptop, coffee going cold beside her. It whispered in her ear during pro bono cases, when she faced clients who couldn't afford a bus ride, let alone a lawyer. She defended tenants from landlords twice their size, often on 2 hours of sleep. She wasn't chasing grades anymore. She was chasing justice. And every win, no matter how small, proved something. She wasn't just earning a piece of paper. She was sharpening a blade. Back in the Senate chamber, that same blade now rested in her hands, and Samuel Alito had just dared to tell her it was worthless. Leaving the courtroom for Congress wasn't a promotion for Jasmine. It was a new battlefield. She'd seen too many laws built in marble halls that crumbled on contact with real life. If she wanted to fix the system, she had to be inside the room where those laws were made. She ran for office on a promise to fight for the communities the system kept overlooking. Working families, veterans, small business owners, and kids who grew up like she did, with nothing but grit to carry them forward. The campaign trail was no parade. She faced whispers about her race, digs about her gender, and smirks from opponents who thought a young black woman from Dallas couldn't possibly last. They didn't just underestimate her. They bet against her. But the people who mattered didn't. At town halls, church basements, and union halls, voters looked her in the eye and said, "Be our voice in that room." That trust was heavier than any campaign sign she carried. When she won, she didn't step into Congress as a rookie. She walked in carrying every story, every promise, every hand that had gripped hers on the campaign trail. So when a Supreme Court justice tried to strip her of that voice, it wasn't just her reputation on the line. It was theirs too. And she was ready to fight like hell to keep it. The words still hung in the air. "Your law degree is worthless." For a beat, Jasmine didn't move. The silence that followed was suffocating, the kind that made you hear your own heartbeat. The Senate chamber, built for noise and debate, felt like it had been sealed in glass. Then, with the calm of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do, Jasmine reached for the leather case at her side. no hurry, no wasted motion. It was as if she had all the time in the world. And in that moment, she did, because the room belonged to her. Her fingers found the brass clasps, snapping them open one by one. The faint creak of worn leather cut through the silence like a match being struck. Inside was no stack of papers, no binder of notes. It was something smaller, older. She slid it out and held it up. A framed sheet of parchment, edges yellowed, the glass scratched from years of being moved from office to office. Her law degree. But in her hand, it looked less like a certificate and more like a battle flag. She didn't slam it down for theatrics. Instead, she lifted it higher, tilting it so the overhead lights caught its surface, making the faded ink glow. Her voice was low, steady, but every word landed like a hammer. "This isn't paper. This is every night I spent fighting for people you've never met," Alito smirked, leaning back. "Touching speech, Congresswoman, but sentiment doesn't win cases." "No," Jasmine shot back, "but facts do. And I brought enough to keep you up tonight." A murmur ran through the gallery. The camera caught a veteran in the front row, blinking back tears. From the upper seats, a young law student called out, "That's why we're here," before being hushed by an usher. A woman in the second row tightened her grip on her husband's hand. Two young law students exchanged a look. Half pride, half awe. Jasmine didn't break eye contact with Alito. "It's every pro bono case I took when I couldn't afford my own rent. Every mother who walked into court terrified and left knowing she had a chance. Every worker who stood up to a company because I stood beside them." Then she set the frame gently on the table between them. Not like evidence. Like a gauntlet, the air had shifted. This was no longer about a degree. It was about worth. And Jasmine Crockett had just made it clear she wasn't letting Samuel Alito define hers. Jasmine didn't let the moment cool. Her hand moved back to the leather case, sliding out a thick stack of files bound in red ribbons. They landed on the table with a heavy thud. The sound of years of work hitting wood. She pulled the ribbon loose. The top file flipped open. Pages fanned just enough for the camera to catch the bold headings. Veterans benefits restored, wrongful termination overturned. Housing rights protected. She slid one folder forward, tapping it with her finger. This is Sergeant Alex Rodriguez. Denied medical coverage until we took his case to federal court and won. He's sitting in this room right now." The camera panned to the front row where Rodriguez nodded once, eyes fixed on Alito. Another file. Maria Torres, fired after 30 years because she got sick. We fought. She got her job back, her pension, and the respect her company tried to take away. Alito leaned toward his mic. "Congresswoman, these anecdotes, while perhaps heartfelt, are hardly relevant to." Jasmine cut in before he could finish, her tone sharp as broken glass. "Relevant? You called my degree worthless. These victories exist because of that degree." Alito tapped the table. "A few files don't change the law." Jasmine leaned in. "No, justice. They change lives. And that's supposed to be the point." The murmurs in the gallery swelled. "That's Rodriguez's case," a man's voice shouted from the back, sparking a few claps before the chairman's gavel brought the room to order. Cameras zoomed tighter on the documents, catching another heading: "Ethical violations ignored by court." She kept going, voice steady but charged. "Every one of these cases represents a person who was told by people like you that their fight didn't matter, and everyone proves you wrong." She let the files sit between them, an unspoken dare for him to look away. The insult he'd thrown was still in the air. But now, it was surrounded by proof that it couldn't stick. Within minutes of Jasmine laying those files on the table, the outside world caught fire. Twitter lit up like a switchboard. degree of justice rocketing to the top of trending in all 50 states. Clips of her standing toe-to-toe with Alito were already racking up millions of views before the hearing had even paused for recess. In a diner outside Cleveland, the TV over the counter played the exchange on repeat. Forks hovered midair as customers leaned in. A retired steelworker muttered, "That's what fighting back looks like," and the whole booth nodded. In a cramped living room in Detroit, a grandmother watching with her grandkids wiped her eyes. "You see that?" she told them. "That's how you tell someone you're not afraid." The oldest, barely 12, whispered, "She's like a superhero." At a union hall in Pittsburgh, the crowd erupted when Jasmine cut Alito off. Men in work boots slapped each other's backs. Women in union jackets clapped until their hands turned red. "Finally," one shouted, "someone in there's got some guts." Outside the Capitol, reporters swarmed supporters pouring out of the public gallery. A young law student grinned into the camera. She made him look small. "You don't see that happen to someone like Alito." A veteran in full-dress uniform simply said, "That woman's got my respect for life." Back inside, the tension didn't fade. It tightened. Alito sat stiff, jaw clenched, his aides whispering in his ear. Jasmine kept her gaze forward, hands folded, the stack of case files still between them like a silent challenge. The country was watching, the tide of public opinion rolling hard in her favor. But in Alito's eyes, there was no retreat, only calculation. And his next move would turn the room into a battlefield. Alito leaned forward again, the faintest curl at the corner of his mouth. "Frankly, Congresswoman, I question whether you even have the intellectual capacity to grasp the complexities of this discussion. And frankly, Justice," Jasmine replied without missing a beat, "I question whether you have the moral capacity to serve the people you swore to protect." The words, "deity," were deliberate, like a blade slid across the table. A few people in the gallery gasped. The veteran in the front row sat up straighter, eyes narrowing. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Thick, cream-colored, with 10 neatly typed questions at the top. The camera zoomed in just enough to catch the title, United States Constitution. Basic Knowledge Assessment. She held it up for everyone to see. "If IQ decides who can serve justice," she said, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut, "let's start with the bench." The reaction was instant, gasps from the gallery, followed by a union worker in the back yelling, "Answer her question," before security moved closer. Reporters' fingers flying across keyboards. A union worker in the back slapped his knee and muttered, "Oh, she's going for it." Jasmine laid the quiz on the table in front of Alito, sliding a pen beside it like a dealer pushing chips in a poker game. Her eyes didn't leave his. 10 questions, all on the Constitution, shouldn't take more than 5 minutes for someone in your position. The tension in the room spiked. Alito glanced at the paper but didn't move his hands. Cameras caught the faint twitch in his jaw. For a moment, the entire chamber held its breath, waiting. Would the justice take the challenge, or show the nation he couldn't? From the front row, a chair scraped against the marble floor. Every head turned as Sergeant Alex Rodriguez rose to his feet, the row of medals on his chest catching the overhead lights. "Congresswoman Crockett fought for me when no one else would," he said, voice steady but loud enough to carry through the chamber. "She gave me my life back. If that's not intelligence, I don't know what is." A ripple of applause started in the gallery before the chairman's gavel brought it down. The sound still echoed, a defiant drumbeat in the heavy air. Up in the public seating, Professor Harris leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, a small smile tugging at his lips. He taught her that a degree was a weapon, and now he was watching her wield it in front of the entire nation. He gave the smallest nod, one only she might notice. Alito shifted in his seat, just a fraction, but enough for the cameras to catch it. The slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers curled against the armrest. Jasmine didn't look away from him, but she felt the weight of her allies behind her. The veteran's voice still rang in the air. The professor's pride was like steel in her spine. And somewhere in the gallery, someone whispered exactly what millions watching were thinking. She's not standing in that room alone. Jasmine let the moment stretch just long enough for the tension to tighten like a wire. Quinny. Then she reached into her case one last time and pulled out a slim, black folder. She placed it on the table, flipped it open, and fanned out a series of glossy pages. The camera lenses snapped to life, zooming in on bold headlines. Undisclosed luxury travel, private dinners with lobbyists, financial gifts not reported. This, she said, tapping the page with a fingernail, isn't rumor. These are receipts, travel records, photographs, and your signature on the thank you cards. The room went still. No coughs, no shuffling of papers. Just the relentless click, click, click of cameras capturing every inch of the evidence. Alito's eyes dropped to the documents. For the first time, his practiced calm seemed to crack, a flicker of something. Recognition, maybe fear, crossing his face before vanishing. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The American people have a right to know whether justice is for sale. Alito's jaw tightened. Careful, Congresswoman? Careful, Jasmine's tone sharpened. That's your word when the truth shows up with receipts? From where I'm sitting, it looks like they've already paid the bill. Gas rippled through the gallery. A union worker in the back shook his head, while someone near the front row blurted, "He's finished!" And the murmur swelled into a low chant before the gavel slammed for silence. A woman near the aisle whispered to the person next to her, "If this sticks, he's done." Jasmine slid the folder closer to him, the sound of paper on wood loud in the dead quiet room. The truth was now out. But would it matter? Alito cleared his throat, fingers tightening around the armrests. Congresswoman, while these allegations are concerning, I must remind the chamber that the scope of today's hearing. He stopped just short of answering anything directly, his words slipping into polished deflection. The chairman glanced down at his notes but didn't press. It was a lifeline Alito was quick to take, sidestepping every sharp point Jasmine had driven into the record. His eyes stayed on the table, avoiding the folder that still lay between them like a loaded weapon. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat back in her chair, hands folded, her gaze steady and unflinching. She didn't need to say another word. The weight of what she'd put on the table was doing the talking for her. From the gallery, her supporters began to move. Sergeant Rodriguez stood and made his way to the rail, nodding once toward her. A group of veterans followed, their presence alone speaking louder than any speech. In the corners of the room, Alito's allies leaned toward each other, whispering fast, the kind of whispers that smelled of damage control. Then, without cue or signal, it started. A slow, deliberate clap from the back row. It spread like a spark, growing into a wave of applause that broke the chamber's tight silence. The chairman's gavel tapped for order, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of a smile. For Jasmine, it wasn't victory yet, but it was a release. The tension snapping into something louder, prouder, and impossible to ignore. By nightfall, the clip had become impossible to escape. It played on a loop across cable talk shows, hosts dissecting every word, every raised eyebrow, every pause between Jasmine and Alito. Podcasts lit up with heated debates, some praising her courage, others clutching pearls about decorum. But for the justice-minded, there was no debate at all. In coffee shops from Seattle to Savannah, strangers leaned over newspapers, murmuring, "Did you see her face when she slid those files across?" Community meetings paused mid-agenda just to replay the footage on a projector. In union halls, the moment drew cheers so loud they rattled folding chairs. Online, her office inbox filled faster than staff could sort. A teacher from Ohio wrote, "I've told my students for years that standing up matters. You just showed them how. A veteran sent a photo of his service medal with the note, "This is for you. You earned it." A single mother from Arizona wrote simply, "You fought for all of us." Jasmine read as many as she could, each one adding weight to the victory that wasn't yet official, but already felt bigger than the chamber walls. Piggy, the country was still split. Sure. There were op-eds calling her reckless, social media threads spinning conspiracy theories, but the numbers didn't lie. In every poll, in every town hall, support for her surged. And through it all, one question kept echoing in the air. If one woman could do this in a single hearing, what else could she take on next? The Capitol steps were a wall of noise. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, supporters pressed shoulder to shoulder. Jasmine stood at the podium, the winter wind tugging at her coat, but her voice cut through it all. "Your worth is not defined by their measure," she said, scanning the crowd, eyes locking with strangers as if she knew them. "It's defined by the people you lift when you stand." A murmur of agreement rolled through the front rows, swelling as it traveled back. Someone started clapping. Then another. And then the chant began. Slow at first, but growing like a drum beat. "Justice for all. Justice for all." The sound bounced off the marble columns, rolled down the National Mall, and carried on the wind. Jasmine didn't raise her hands for quiet. She let it build. She let it belong to them. Behind her, the Capitol dome loomed. The same building where hours ago, a Supreme Court justice had tried to strip her down with a single sentence. Now, it was the place where her words were rising higher than his ever could. She stepped back from the mic, her work here done for the day. But her face held the same look she'd worn in the chamber. Steady, unshaken, ready for the next fight. And over the roar of the crowd, the narrator's voice cut in, low and deliberate. "If your voice shook the walls of power, what would you say?" Just as Jasmine proved before the entire nation, true worth cannot be erased by an insult. It's etched into the lives we've protected and the principles we've stood for at any age. We can use our voices to stand for justice and for those with fewer chances than ourselves. If one day your story could change the convictions of an entire room, would you be ready to speak? If Jasmine's stand stirred something in you, don't just watch in silence. Like, share, and subscribe to First Shock. Where courage speaks louder than power, tap the bell. Because tomorrow, the fight might need your voice. Which moment made you feel, "This is why we stand up"? Drop it in the comments. Because justice lives when we all speak. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching.